I'll make good use of this 20 pounds million building. You've worked hard all these years. Goodbye and farewell. The words whispered into my ear by the husband. Embracing me were not of comfort, but a curse. It was the chilling whisper a husband of 35 years let slip on the day I returned home after being given just 2 months to live. Behind my back, he was counting down the days until my death, laughing and chatting with another woman. But my husband didn't know one thing. He didn't realize that my sharp eyes, honed by a lifetime of tending boiling pots of beef stew and pastry, had been watching their filthy little play from the very beginning. One urgent phone call from the hospital. In that single moment, my husband screamed and fainted on the spot. Just what exactly happened? At that hospital? Let us begin the story right now. Hello, my name is Eleanor Davies, and I am 58 years old. I am someone who started with absolutely nothing, building my life with my bare hands. In my youth, I set up a small pie and mash shop with a single large stewing pot in a corner of an East London market, barely surviving day by day. I would be out at 4 a.m., lighting the stoves, living my life stained with grease until late at night. I routinely skipped meals just to serve one more customer, and even in the freezing British winters, my hands cracked and bled from washing pots in ice-cold water. To make a single perfect beef and ale pie, I went to Smithfield Meat Market every dawn to hand-pick the finest cuts of beef. I soaked the meat, slow-cooked it for half a day, skimmed the fat, and even prepared the ludi, a traditional mash and liquor gravy entirely by myself. Because I put my heart into it, customers started queuing up, and my regulars grew, with people traveling from afar just to taste my food. Rain or snow, even on bank holidays, I never once closed the shop doors. After 30 years of working like that every single day, I grew that tiny market stall into the most famous traditional pie and mash establishment in London. Every single pie sold eventually added up, allowing me to build a magnificent 20 pounds million commercial building right in the heart of the city. People looked at me and called me a legend of self-made success. But to me, that building wasn't just property. It was my blood, sweat, and tears. It was my life itself, built brick by my cracked and calloused hands. Every stone in that building held 30 years of my time. But while I was achieving all this, what was my husband, Arthur, doing? Now 60 years old, he was a man who had never so much placed as dipped his hands in dishwater his entire life. While I was breaking my back in front of the ovens from the crack of dawn, my husband was out playing golf in Surrey with his mates, driving a luxury Jaguar, bought with my money, and going about soaking up the title of boss. He never once helped at the shop, nor did he ever acknowledge my hardships. Instead, he made a habit of belittling me in front of others. He'd casually drop remarks that chipped away at my pride, calling me a tacky woman who smelled of beef, gravy, or saying that even though I had money, I was uncultured and ignorant. Even as he ate the meals I prepared, he'd brag in front of his friends as if the wealth was entirely of his own making. Still, I endured it, thinking this was simply what marriage was, that if one person earned, the other could rest. Being a childless couple, I truly believed he was the person I would grow old with until the very end. I lived my whole life holding it in, enduring time and time again. Just how foolish that belief was, I only realized the night I returned from that hospital. To me, the terminal diagnosis and my husband's chilling whisper were a massive shock. But a strange thing happened. From that day on, my husband suddenly transformed into the most doting, affectionate man in the world. He personally went out to buy my favorite foods, massaged my place, hands and feet, and whenever it was time for a hospital visit, he rushed over to support me. Darling, I got you that Earl Grey tea and fine broth you love. Even if you have no appetite, just take a sip. Whenever my husband brought a cup and brought the spoon to my lips, I had to suppress the goosebumps rising on my skin. To anyone else, we were the picture-perfect couple, a match made in heaven. A pitiful husband tenderly caring for his dying wife. People clicked their tongues in sympathy and felt heartbroken for him. But I knew the truth. I knew exactly what lay beneath that affection. That man was simply playing the role of a good husband to the bitter end, desperately waiting for me to die as quickly as possible. It even reached the point where I suspected that the bowl of soup he handed me might be something designed to hasten my death. Every time I received his chillingly meticulous care, I clenched my fists tightly beneath the duvet, and in my heart I made a quiet vow. Standing before the mirror, I stared straight at my gaunt, hollow face and muttered lowly, "I am not dying like this. Eleanor Davies, I will absolutely not die like this." I could not hand over a single brick of this building, which I had built with my daughter, blood and sweat, to a monster like him. The freezing 4 a.m. winds, my cracked hands, the skipped meals, they were all melted into that very building. That building was my life, and I had no intention of dying quietly for the man who was sneering at me while trying to steal it. It was the very first time in my life, having only ever endured, that I gritted my teeth and began to sharpen my knives. Even I couldn't guess where the tip of that blade would point. But one thing was certain. I was absolutely not going to die gracefully, just as that man wished. From that night on, I began the greatest acting performance of my life. I decided to become the most pitiful, frail, dying wife imaginable. When my husband fed me, I ate weakly. When he supported me, I pretended to lean my entire body weight onto his arm. Sometimes, I deliberately acted vulnerable and shed tears in front of him. Every time I did, he would stroke my back with a perfectly sympathetic face. But I could clearly feel the true intentions hidden beneath his touch, that cold impatience, wishing for this theatrical play to end as soon as possible. As I acted, my husband's two faces began to come into sharp focus. Whenever relatives or neighbors visited, he became the most devoted husband on earth. He would tear up, saying he couldn't live without me, and hold my hand tight, refusing to let go. People were so moved by this. They envied me, saying I was blessed to have such a man. One neighbor even held my hand with teary eyes, saying it was at least a relief I had a husband like him. Every time that happened, I swallowed a bitter, hollow laugh. But the moment the guests left and we were alone, his affection vanished like a lie. If I asked for a glass of water, he would sigh as if I were a nuisance. If he thought I was asleep, he would sit beside me staring at his phone, texting someone. Once, I woke up to use the bathroom and saw him sitting on the living room sofa, smiling gleefully at his phone screen. It was a look of such pure, blissful happiness that one could never believe it belonged to a man whose wife was dying. I pretended not to notice and returned to my room, but my chest felt so hollow and cold that I tossed and turned for hours. During these precarious days, my only nephew, Thomas, came to visit. Thomas was my late sister's son, whom I had taken in and raised like my own, flesh and blood. He now managed my building, and was the one person in the world who genuinely cared for me, my only true ally. As soon as Thomas saw my gaunt face, his eyes welled up with tears. "Auntie Eleanor, why do you look so ill? Are you eating properly? I'm so sorry I haven't been able to visit more often." I patted Thomas's hand and forced a smile. I couldn't bring myself to tell this kind-hearted boy the horrific truth I had discovered just yet. I was worried he would get angry and ruin things. And more than anything, I was terrified of the hurt it would cause him. "I'm fine, Thomas. Your aunt is still going strong. You're the one working so hard managing the building," has your uncle said. "Anything lately?" I asked casually, testing the waters. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. He hesitated for a moment before speaking carefully. He told me that my husband had suddenly shown an intense interest in the building's affairs. A man who had never gone near the property his entire life was suddenly asking relentless questions about tenancy agreements and the current market value of the estate. On top of that, a few days ago, he even asked how to obtain the official title register from the land registry. Thomas said it was weighing heavily on his mind, worrying that his uncle might be harboring ulterior motives. The moment I heard those words, a chilling sensation ran down my spine. A man who had played and eaten off my money his whole life was only now, after my terminal diagnosis, eyeing the property. To prevent Thomas from probing deeper and putting himself in danger, I feigned ignorance, laughed it off, and changed the subject. But inside, I engraved his words deeply into my heart, because I knew that this boy's intuition and my own dreadful premonition would soon prove to be absolutely correct. It happened that evening. My husband sliced an apple, pushed a piece toward me, and opened his mouth in a very cautious tone. It was the kind of tone that pretended to care for me whilst subtly leaking his true intentions. Darling, it's a bit awkward to bring this up, but you never know what the future holds. Wouldn't it be a good idea to sort out the estate and assets in advance while your mind is still clear? I'm only suggesting this to make things easier for you. My heart plummeted, but outwardly I nodded as if it were nothing. If I lost my temper here, he would know I had caught on to everything. Yes, darling. You're quite right. Let's think it over slowly and sort it out. I trust only you. As I replied so compliantly, a brief, satisfied smile flickered across his lips. I did not miss that smile. This man is rushing to make me hand over my assets, with my own hands before I lose my wits. The entire picture was becoming clearer. Thinking about it, there was a reason for his impatience. The doctor had given me 2 months. From my husband's perspective, he had to secure everything within those 2 months. He needed to have the assets legally transferred while I was still alive and mentally sound, to avoid any legal disputes later. That was why, even while acting like a devoted nurse, he kept subtly dropping hints about estate planning. From that day on, I vowed never to recklessly sign or stamp any document he presented. Simultaneously, I resolved to uncover the real reason he was in such a frantic rush. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Some time passed. Midnight, in the deep silence of the early hours, I felt the space beside me was empty. My husband was gone. I quietly got up and stepped out of the room. A low voice was leaking from the living room patio. My husband was on the phone, but it was a tone of voice I had never heard in my entire life. He sounded giddy and breathless, like a young man deeply in love. I held my breath and pressed myself flat against the wall, straining to listen. My heart was beating so loudly I was terrified he might hear it. Just wait a little longer. It really won't be long now. Yeah, once everything is sorted out, just the two of us, I'll keep the promise I made. I stood frozen in the dark, hearing every single word. Once everything is sorted, just the two of us, in that two of us, I did not exist. I didn't know who was on the other end of the line, but the deep affection in his voice was undeniable. It was a tender tone he had never once shown me. My trembling hand gripped the wall. My legs gave way and I almost collapsed right there. It wasn't just about stealing my building. There was already someone else by his side, perhaps long before I was even diagnosed. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just simple greed for money. It was something far deeper, far dirtier. The outline of the Kraden, grand scheme drawn by my husband waiting for my death, and the mystery woman hiding beside him was slowly coming to light. I stood in the dark by the patio. For a long time, rage surged up my throat, urging me to kick the door open and confront him, but I forced that anger down and swallowed it whole. If I lost my temper now and ruined things, I would lose everything I had built over my lifetime to those two. The patience I had forged standing in front of boiling pie ovens my entire life anchored me once again. I quietly returned to my room and lay back down. Staring at the ceiling, I made a firm resolution that night I would find out exactly who he was talking to and what those two were. Plotting, seeing it through to the end with my own 2 eyes, I believed that was the final task left for me in the time I had remaining. The day after, overhearing his midnight phone call, I began playing the dying wife even more meticulously. When I woke in the morning, I deliberately let out weak groans and left half the food he fed me, pretending to have no appetite. Whenever I stood before the mirror, my gaunt face stared back, but I actually considered my haggard appearance a blessing. The weaker I looked, the more he would drop his guard. My sharp intuition, the very same instinct that once read a customer's mood just by their expression in the market, was now being used to read my husband's dark intentions. A few days passed, and one evening, my husband peeled an apple, handed it to me, and spoke with a slightly different expression than usual. It was a cautious look, as if he had made a major decision but was still trying to read my mood. Darling, I met a really brilliant person today. Someone highly skilled in property and estate matters. Nibbling on a slice of apple, I slowly looked up, pretending to be entirely plate percent. Clueless. I saw his pupils tremble ever so slightly. What kind of person? Darling? He gave a fake cough, then pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. He gently placed it on my lap. I did not miss the slight tremor in his fingertips as he set it down. It's nothing major, but I thought it best to cleanly sort out the estate deeds while your mind is clear. In this day and age, if we don't do it in advance, it'll only cause you headaches later. I'm only doing this for your peace of mind. I picked up the envelope and slowly peered. Inside, it was filled with complex legal jargon, but one thing was crystal clear. These were documents transferring the ownership of my London building into my husband's name. Something boiling hot surged in my chest, but I firmly pushed it down. Then, placing the envelope back on my lap, I spoke in the most pitiful, exhausted voice I could muster. Darling, my head is so dizzy lately. Looking at this makes me completely confused. Give me a few days. When my mind clears up, I'll look at it calmly and sign it. At my words, a brief flash of disappointment crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a sweet smile and patted my hand. Of course, take your time, there's absolutely no rush. Your health comes first. No rush at all? I knew all too well that his brain was screaming, desperate to get my signature on those papers this very second. Even as he told me to take my time, I noticed him glancing sideways all evening, watching exactly where I placed the envelope. Pretending not to notice, I placed it on my bedside table and rolled over, feigning deep sleep. The next day, I claimed I was feeling a bit better and wanted to visit the building. My husband offered to come, but I stubbornly refused, saying Thomas was going to drive me. Upon hearing that, I wanted to take a nostalgic look at the building I had built with my own hands. My husband couldn't stop me. It happened when Thomas and I arrived at the closer property. As I stepped into the ground floor lobby, I involuntarily stopped in my tracks. A strange woman was pacing the lobby as if she owned the place, talking on her mobile phone. She looked to be in her early 40s, impeccably dressed with heavy makeup. Seeing me enter, she abruptly ended her call and offered an Eptery 24 awkward smile. Hello, are you by any chance the owner of this building? I stared intently at her face. Even though it was a face I was seeing for the first time, a chilling sensation crept down my spine. Thomas, standing beside me, leaned in and whispered low in my ear, Auntie, that woman has been coming around the building a lot lately. She claims to be a property consultant, but she keeps poking around asking about tenancy rates and market value. I thought it was highly suspicious. A property consultant. I masked my expression and slowly approached her. Then, I offered her the smooth, seasoned smile I had perfected over decades in the market. Yes, I am the owner. But what brings you to inspect our building so frequently? The woman blinked, momentarily flustered, but quickly recovered, with a slick excuse. Oh, I manage several properties in this area. It's such a prime location and a beautiful building, so I've been keeping an eye on it. Do you have any thoughts of selling? The moment the word selling left her lips, I saw a subtle, gleaming light in her eyes. It was not a professional gaze. It was a look of profound greed, desperately waiting for something. I turned freezing cold inside, but outwardly I maintained my warm, good-natured smile. Sell it? This building is like my own child. My entire life went into it. Even if I die, I have no intention of letting it fall into someone else's hands. At my words, the woman's face stiffened for a split second before relaxing again. I clearly read that fleeting change in expression. This woman knows I am going to die soon. She knows the owner of this building will soon change. Otherwise, she would never have shown such a look to a complete stranger. In that spot, I became absolutely certain. The sweet, affectionate voice on the other end of my husband's midnight phone call was likely this very woman standing before me. After she said her goodbyes and left, Thomas looked at me with deep concern. Auntie, there is definitely something dodgy about her, and about Uncle Arthur. A few days ago, he went to the land registry and obtained the title register for our building. I heard it by chance from a solicitor I know. Uncle went there personally to request it. At Thomas's words, I took a moment to catch my breath. A man who never came near the building had gone in person to pull the registry deeds? The midnight phone call, the transfer documents placed on my lap, and this strange woman right in front of me, the scattered puzzle. Pieces were all snapping perfectly into place. Standing in the middle of the lobby, I quietly looked up at the ceiling of the building I had poured 30 years of my life into. Thomas, could you do your aunt a favor? Could you quietly find out exactly who that woman is and what she does? Very quietly so no one notices. Though Thomas looked perplexed, he nodded immediately. I couldn't yet tell this kind-hearted boy the whole truth, but my intuition was screaming that this woman was the key to this entire nightmare. On the drive back home that day, I silently watched the London streets passing by the window. I had hurried down these very streets, every dawn of my life, hauling beef, carrying supplies, scrubbing floors. The 30 years perfectly preserved in that building were now being tossed around in the plastic palms of those two people. Looking at my reflection in the car window, I muttered very softly to myself, "Right, let's see how this plays out. Let's see who wins in the end." When I arrived home, my husband was waiting for me at the front door. He supported my shoulders and asked in his most affectionate tone, "Darling, was the trip exhausting? Did you get a good look around? Have you had a chance to think about those documents?" Letting myself lean against his tender support, I offered him the most exhausted smile imaginable, and then I gave him exactly the answer he was dying to hear. "Yes, Arthur. I've thought about it. And you are right. Before my mind gets any more clouded, I should sort out what needs sorting." I clearly saw his eyes flash with brilliant greed the moment I spoke. Instinctively, the corners of his mouth twitched upwards, though he hastily forced them back down into a look of sorrow. Watching his clumsy acting, I laughed coldly on the inside. You have no idea that the faster you rush, the higher I am stacking my own cards against you. You couldn't dream that Eleanor, who endured you her whole life, is now sharpening her blade more meticulously than anyone else. That night, lying in the dark staring at the ceiling, I quietly made my plans. I thought about what I would ask the solicitor I was soon to meet, and how I would flip the trap those two had dug right back onto them. However, even then, I did not know one thing. I didn't know that yet another truth was about to fall into my hands. One that would flip this entire board completely upside down. Since that day, I began watching my husband's every single move with intense scrutiny. Outwardly playing the dying wife, inwardly I watched with eagle eyes for his mistakes. Because he believed my mind was fading, he was letting his guard down more and more. He checked his phone freely in front of me and didn't even bother going far away to make calls. He acted as though there could be no secrets kept from a dying person. To me, a woman who had dealt with every kind of person in the markets all her life, his carelessness was the ultimate opportunity. A few days later, in the afternoon, my husband fell asleep sitting on the living room sofa. He must have felt drowsy after a heavy lunch. Suddenly, the phone slipped from his hand and dropped onto the floor with a thud. The screen lit up upon impact. Pretending to go fetch some water, I slowly walked past and casually glanced down at the screen. I froze dead in my tracks. A text message was displayed on the screen. The sender's name wasn't saved, but the content was chillingly clear. "Darling, is that woman really going in 2 months? I can't wait much longer. You mustn't forget what we promised. That woman?" My heart crashed to the floor. Those 2 words, "that woman," felt like a knife, carving out my heart. In the mobile phone of the man I had spent my entire life with, I was nothing more than that woman who needed to die and vanish as quickly as possible. Barely steadying my trembling hands, I burned the image of that text message into my retinas. Then, pretending nothing had happened, I walked into the kitchen. I heard my husband shifting in his sleep behind me, but I didn't look back. Standing by the kitchen sink, I remained frozen for a long time. It wasn't even rage anymore. It was a crushing wave of futility. 35 years. I believed we were growing old together through all those long years, but in his mind, I had long been a burden he was waiting to dispose of. I gripped the edge of the sink with both hands and swallowed the tears rising in my throat. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Crying now meant absolutely nothing. That night, I lay in bed pretending to have gone to sleep early. Yet again, I felt the space next to me empty. My husband had gone out to the patio to make a call, holding my breath. I carefully opened the bedroom door and pressed myself against the one-das wall. That night, his voice was louder than usual. He must have firmly believed I was in a deep sleep. The building's market value is over £20 million now. Once the deeds are transferred to my name, I'll put it on the market immediately. We can take that money and go live abroad, just the two of us. Pressed against the wall, I heard every single word crystal clear. Sell it as soon as the deeds are transferred? The building I had poured 30 years of my life into was nothing to him but a lump, the sum of cash to go play abroad with his mistress. A moment later, his voice softened dramatically. Don't worry. I'll handle the distribution cleanly. I'll make sure you get your absolute share. How long have we endured just looking forward to this one thing? Let's hold on just a little longer. Yeah, I clenched, my fist tightly in the dark. I didn't even notice my fingernails digging into my palms. How long have we endured looking forward to this? Those words meant that the two of them had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Long before I was given a terminal diagnosis. This meant my illness wasn't a horrific tragedy to them, but the golden opportunity they had been praying for. In that moment, a thought flashed through my mind. If they really knew about my illness and were waiting for it, or perhaps if there was something even more sinister at play, I couldn't bear to finish that thought and shook my head. Still, one thing was perfectly clear. This was not just a passing affair or sudden greed. It was a highly calculated plan that had been in motion for a long time. I quietly returned to my room and lay down again. Staring at the ceiling, strangely, my mind felt icy calm. My questions now outweighed my sorrow. When exactly did they start plotting this? And is it actually true that I am dying in 2 months? That final question remained like a small, burning ember in my chest. The next day, I went to the hospital for a routine checkup. My husband offered to come along, but again, using Thomas as an excuse, I went alone. Entering the consulting room, my doctor looked over my charts and examined me as usual. But on that particular day, the doctor's expression was strangely subtle. He looked as though he was hesitating to say something. I didn't miss that hesitation. My eyes, which had spent a lifetime reading the table and HN, true thoughts of customers from a single glance, caught that microscopic shift. I spoke up carefully. Doctor, I don't know if I should ask this, but is it possible that a diagnosis like this could be wrong? It is human error. After all, the doctor paused his pen. Pushing up his glasses, he answered a beat, slower than usual. Well, in medicine, there is rarely such a thing as 100%, which is why, Mrs. Davies, there is something slightly bothering me. I would like you to take the tests just one more time in the near future. It's best to be absolutely certain. At the words, take the tests one more time, a strange ripple washed through my heart. Something is bothering him? I wanted to press him for what that meant, but the doctor merely repeated that we needed to be certain. I agreed and left the room. Walking down the corridor, the doctor's words wouldn't leave my mind. Be absolutely certain. Something is bothering me, the words echoed in my ears. For the first time, it dawned on me that my 2-month death sentence might not be as definitive as I thought. I cupped that tiny possibility in my heart like shielding a dying ember with both hands. It was a secret I could not let anyone, especially my husband, find out. When I returned home, my husband greeted me with that same affectionate face. Examining my features, he asked with feigned worry. Darling, what did the hospital say? Have things gotten worse? The doctor didn't say anything bad, did he? To his question, I showed absolutely no sign that I had noticed anything. Instead, I put on the most helpless, despairing face I could muster. What else could he say? He just told me to rest and keep my mind at peace. Because there isn't much time left. At my reply, a flash of relief crossed his face. He quickly replaced it with a mask of sorrow and stroked my back. Accepting his touch, I muttered coldly in my mind. You believe I am going to die soon. But little do you know, that belief might be the first step into the trap you dug for yourself. That night, I took out the property transfer documents my Lex 81 husband had shoved at me and stared at them. Those two were desperate to get my signature before my mind went entirely. The phone call about selling, the text, Message mentioning that woman and the promise of a payout. The picture was almost complete. There were only two mysteries left to solve: the exact identity of that woman and what exactly was bothering the doctor. I put the documents back into the drawer and quietly sent a text message to Thomas. I asked him to secretly let me know if he had found anything about that woman the next time we were alone. I also decided I had to take that retest the doctor recommended as soon as possible, without my husband knowing. I had a premonition that these two things would be the keys to lighting up the end of this long, dark tunnel. Lying down, staring at the ceiling, what burned in my chest was neither sorrow nor rage, but something else entirely. It was a freezing, cold resolve to survive to the very end and expose the truth. It was the moment Eleanor, who had endured time and time again her whole life, finally started sharpening the knife for herself. It was 3 or 4 days later when I heard back from Thomas. That morning, my husband left the house early, claiming he had a golf arrangement with his mates. Leaving his dying wife behind, he was still driving my car around, loving the tease-escato sound of people calling him boss. The moment I confirmed he was gone, I called Thomas over. Thomas entered the hallway looking incredibly tense. In his hand was a manila envelope. Auntie, about that woman you asked me to look into. I did some digging, but the more I looked, the stranger it got. I sat Thomas down at the dining table and poured him a warm cup of tea. He pulled several sheets of paper from the envelope and laid them before me. They contained her photo, her name, and her profession. Her name is Victoria Sterling, 39 years old. She goes around calling herself a property consultant, but it turns out she doesn't even have a proper office. She basically acts as a middleman, passing on commercial property info and taking a finder's fee. But, Auntie, here's the weird part. Thomas paused and studied my face. I nodded, calmly, signaling him to continue. This Victoria didn't just appear at our building a month or two ago. I quietly asked some of the ground floor tenants, and they said she's been lurking around the area since last autumn. A few people even saw her having coffee with Uncle Arthur. At the words last autumn, I slowly lowered the teacup I was holding. Last autumn meant more than half a year before I was given my terminal diagnosis. That meant this woman had been hovering around my husband while I was still perfectly healthy. My heart ran ice cold, but outwardly I did not waver in the slightest. Thomas, did anyone happen to take a photo of them together? Thomas carefully pulled out his mobile phone. After hesitating for a long while, he showed me a photograph. The owner of the ground floor cafe gave me this. It was taken entirely by accident around late December last year. He was taking a group photo for some customers, and they happened to be in the background. Auntie, please. Brace yourself before looking at this. I quietly stared at the photo Thomas handed me. My husband and that woman were sitting facing each other by the cafe window. But this was no professional Plymantlers bided meeting. My husband was wrapping his hands tenderly around hers, and they both wore affectionate smiles that I hadn't seen in 35 years of marriage. In the party in Savinia's corner of the photo, a small date was stamped. December. I stared at that photo for a long time. Strangely, no tears came. It simply felt as though 35 years of my life had collapsed into dust in a single second. While I was breaking my back, from 4 a.m. in front of boiling ovens, that man was holding her hand, laughing, like that. And he did it back when I was healthy, completely oblivious. Auntie, are you all right? I'm worried I shouldn't have shown you this. Thomas grasped my hand, his voice thick with tears. I gently patted his hand and forced a smile. No, Thomas, you did brilliantly. This was something I absolutely had to know. Thanks to you, your aunt can finally look at the truth with eyes wide open. Thank you. Truly thank you. That night, I couldn't sleep, chewing over the date in that photo, December last year, and my terminal diagnosis was only one this year. This meant their relationship had started long before my illness. Perhaps my illness was merely a godsend to them, the perfect opportunity they had been waiting for. I made a quiet decision in the dark. It was no longer time to suffer alone. It was time to meet the right person and get professional help. A few days later, using a hospital visit as an excuse, I left the house. But my destination was not the hospital, but a solicitor's office in Lincoln's Inn. There was a Mr. Harrison, a solicitor who had helped me with the conveyancing broke/the dom When I first bought the building, he was a dignified, careful man, and I knew there was no one better to entrust with this task. As I entered the office, Mr. Harrison welcomed me warmly, but seeing my gaunt face, his expression darkened. Immediately. "Mrs. Davies, how have you been? You look terribly unwell. Are you ill?" I sat down and, in a calm voice, began to lay out everything that had happened step by step. The terminal diagnosis, the horrific whisper from my husband, and the existence of the woman by his side. I didn't cry loudly, nor did I stumble over my words with emotion. I simply spoke clearly and steadily, as if telling someone else's story. After hearing everything, Mr. Harrison sat in grim silence for a long time. "Mrs. Davies, how could such a thing? How could a man you've lived with for 35 years do this?" "As a fellow man, I am utterly ashamed," he said with genuine outrage. Looking at this steadfast man, I finally revealed my true intentions. "Mr. Harrison, I didn't come here to cry. I want to ensure that man cannot take a single brick of my building, the property I built with my blood and sweat. I came to ask if that is legally possible within the bounds of the law." At my resolute words, Mr. Harrison stared at me silently for a moment. Then, adjusting his glasses, he nodded slowly. "It is possible, Mrs. Davies. Entirely possible. However, there is one thing you must absolutely ensure. You must never let them realize you know. The moment they figure out you know everything, they will resort to other tactics. You must play the dying, oblivious wife to the prime/very end. Can you do that?" I nodded without a second's hesitation. "I am already doing it, Mr. Harrison. Enduring and putting on a brave face is what I perfected in the markets. I can do it flawlessly." At my reply, Mr. Harrison smiled, looking reassured. From that day on, we began to meticulously prepare a legal fortress to protect my building without my husband knowing. Rule 1. Do not recklessly sign or stamp any document. Rule 2. Delay the deed. Transfers my husband pushes on me, buying time. Rule 3. Legally shift the ponis, ownership and control of the building, into a secure trust. For the first time in my life, I felt I had a formidable ally on my side. Before leaving the office, I confessed one last thing. "Mr. Harrison, there is one more thing bothering me. A few days ago at the hospital, my doctor told me to take the tests one more time. He said something was bothering him. I can't stop thinking about what that could mean." At my words, Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "A retest? Mrs. Davies, that could be immensely important. A doctor wouldn't say that without reason. Do not delay that retest. Get it done immediately. The sooner, the better." I etched his words deeply into my heart. Both the doctor and the solicitor were urging me to take that retest. The premonition that the test results would be the final key to overturning this entire board grew sharper. On the drive home, I silently watched the London streets passing by. The scattered puzzle pieces were now almost entirely in their rightful places. The woman hovering around. Since last autumn, the photo of them holding hands in the cafe, and their plan to sell the building and flee abroad. All that was left was to flip the trap they had dug, making them fall into it themselves. That evening, when I returned home, my husband greeted me as affectionately as ever. Holding my hand, he asked, in his gentlest voice, "Darling, how was the hospital? How is your body feeling? Don't overdo it, just rest well." "Yes?" Accepting his touch, I offered him the most pitiful, exhausted smile. And then, I quietly repeated in my mind, "You think you've already won, don't you? But you couldn't possibly dream that the real game has only just begun. You have no idea that Eleanor, who endured her whole life, will absolutely not go down easily. This time, I got my hands on the absolute, definitive proof completely by accident. That day, my husband went out for golf again. I was left alone in the house, taking a moment to breathe freely, away from the role of the dying wife. But I noticed my capture. The husband had left his laptop sitting right on the living room coffee table. It was something he usually always carried in his briefcase, but he must have been in such a rush for his golf match that he forgot it. I hesitated for a moment. But soon, with trembling hands, I opened the laptop. I felt no guilt whatsoever. Why would I feel guilt towards a man who called me that woman after a lifetime? Together? The screen was locked with a password, but I cracked it on the very first try. I had lived with him for 35 years. The moment I typed in the numbers he used for everything his birthday, the screen unlocked smoothly. And there, in the corner of the desktop, was a specific folder. The moment I opened it, I thought my heart would stop. Inside were meticulously organized documents regarding my building, the title register, tenancy schedules, market valuation reports, and even memos detailing the procedure for selling a commercial property. But the moment I saw the creation dates of those files, I nearly dropped the mouse. The oldest file was dated last November. That was over 5 months before I received my terminal diagnosis. This meant that long before he even knew I was ill, he was already plotting how to sell off my building. I scrolled down further and opened a notepad file. The contents were so vile it was hard to believe a human being had written them. Transfer Eleanor's deeds, then sell. Distribute with Victoria. Time it according to Eleanor's health decline. Need to secure medical records. I read that memo over and over again. Time it according to her health decline? Need to secure medical records? The words writhed before my eyes like live snakes. This man wasn't just waiting for my death. He was actively monitoring my health to find the perfect moment to strike and sell the building. Perhaps he had been eagerly anticipating the day my body broke down long before I even knew I was sick. I sat frozen in front of the laptop for a long time. In that moment, the memories of the past few weeks played backwards in my mind. I remembered the night I came home with the terminal diagnosis, how he held me, tight in his arms. Darling, don't worry too much. I'll be by your side to the very end. His low, tender voice had almost made me burst into tears. But that affection was a performance from start to finish. The same mouth that whispered, "Goodbye, farewell." In my ear was the one crying in front of others, claiming he couldn't live without his wife. I remembered the hands that fed me my favorite tea and soup. Even if you have no appetite, just take a sip. Behind that gentle voice hid a cold impatience, wishing for this charade to end quickly. The hands that massaged my feet were the very same hands calculating the market value of my life's work. Everything was a lie. The thought that my entire 35 years might have been one giant, colossal lie made me collapse and sob right there on the spot. I hadn't meant to cry, but that day, the tears wouldn't stop. I didn't wail out loud, but hot. Tears streamed endlessly down my cheeks. It wasn't out of anger. It wasn't out of unfairness. It was simply that everything I had trusted and relied on my entire life was an Epertine and Key Deschanel. Illusion from the start, and that reality tore my heart to shreds. I wept, silently in front of that laptop, mourning my 35 years. But the crying didn't last long. After sobbing for a while, I slowly wiped my tears and stood up. Then, using my mobile phone, I took clear photographs of every single file in that folder, one by one. My hands shook, but I didn't miss a single page. These were no longer the artifacts of my sorrow. They were the most powerful weapons that would destroy those two. After capturing every file, I placed the laptop exactly where it had been, precisely as I found it, not a single inch out of place. That evening, my husband returned from golf. He approached me with his usual affectionate face, but that day, his affection felt thicker, more cloying than usual. It was the kind of affection designed to rush me. "Darling, I've been thinking hard about it today. Those documents, for sorting the deeds. If we're going to do it, wouldn't it be better to get it done quickly? We should. Do it while your mind is clear so you can have peace of mind later." My husband held my hand, speaking in his most caring voice. The touch made my skin crawl, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I gave him the most powerless, exhausted nod. "Yes, Arthur, you are right. But my hands keep shaking lately, and it takes so much effort just to hold a pen. Let me gather my strength for a few more days, and we'll handle it cleanly on a day my mind is sharp. After all, what's the rush between the two of us?" At my words, the corners of his mouth stiffened, briefly before relaxing. It was a look of immense frustration, wanting to push me further but unable to do so. Watching his face, I laughed coldly inside. "You are that desperate, aren't you? But the day you get my signature on those papers will never, ever come." The next day, I went back to Mr. Harrison's office. I showed him every single photograph I had taken on my phone. The sale plan started last November. The memo about distributing the funds with Victoria, and the horrific note about timing the sale with my failing health. Mr. Harrison's face turned completely to stone as he looked through the files. Mrs. Davies, this is not a simple case of adultery or greed. This is a premeditated, highly calculated plot to steal your cropotus assets, and it began long before you even knew you were ill. With this evidence, no matter what they try, your assets are completely bulletproof. Hearing his words, I finally felt my heart settle into an icy calm. There was no more sorrow or rage, only a freezing resolve to do what needed to be done. I looked Mr. Harrison dead in the eye and spoke clearly. Mr. Harrison, simply, punishing him through the courts isn't enough to satisfy me. I want to make sure that the exact moment they are absolutely certain they have won, they lose everything. I want them to shoot themselves in the foot. Is that possible? Mr. Harrison stared at me silently for a moment. Then he nodded slowly and answered, with a bedrock of confidence. It is possible, Mrs. Davies. The more they rush, the deeper they will dig their own grave. All you have to do is keep playing the fake. Oblivious wife to the very end. I will prepare everything flawlessly within the Stevens bounds of the law, leaving them not a single loophole. I nodded deeply. That day, Mr. Harrison and I began to draw the blueprint of our Canaan's Tan counterattack. How to secure the building he was trying to steal, and how to use their own greed against them. On the drive home, I stared at my reflection in the car window. Just a few days ago, it was the pitiful face of a woman waiting to die. Now, it had transformed into the hardened face of someone who would see this through to the bitter end. The Eleanor who had endured her whole life had finally drawn her sword. And those two hadn't the faintest idea where the tip of that sword was pointing. However, even then, I didn't know. I didn't know that a single phone call from the hospital a few days later would flip this entire board in a direction I couldn't possibly have imagined. That phone call came on a perfectly ordinary afternoon. I was lying weakly on the living room sofa, playing the dying wife as usual. My husband was beside me, looking at his phone and texting someone, probably that woman. Thinking I was asleep, a faint smile hung on his lips. Right at that moment, my mobile phone rang loudly. The screen displayed the name of my London hospital. I slowly sat up and answered the call. I could feel my husband beside me prick up his ears, but I acted entirely normal as I brought the phone to my ear. But the voice on the other end was incredibly urgent and trembling. Hello? Is this Mrs. Eleanor Davies? I am a supervisor from the hospital's pathology lab. Are you able to talk right now? I have something extremely urgent to tell you. Glancing sideways at my husband, I answered in my most feeble voice. Yes, go ahead. What is the matter? The supervisor continued, her voice practically on the verge of tears. And then she confessed something so unbelievable I could hardly process it. Mrs. Davies, I am so terribly sorry. We have made a catastrophic error regarding your test results from last time. The biopsy. Samples were swapped. Your sample was swapped with another patient who was tested around the same time. Meaning, that terminal diagnosis was not your result. The moment I heard those words, my entire body froze stiff. The samples were swapped? The terminal diagnosis wasn't mine? The supervisor, her voice shaking, repeated herself clearly. Mrs. Davies, you do not have that illness. The results from the retest you took a few days ago just came out. You are perfectly healthy. I cannot imagine the mental anguish you have suffered, and we are profoundly sorry. This is a clear, inexcusable error on the hospital's part. I held the receiver, speechless for a long time. It felt as though a massive tidal wave had crashed into my chest and receded. I am not dying, I am perfectly alive and healthy. That reality washed over my entire being. But even in that moment, I did not forget the husband sitting right next to me. I deliberately made my voice tremble even more, answering like a person utterly crushed by despair. Yes, I understand. I see. Yes, I will contact you again. Later. Then, I quietly hung up the phone. My husband, his face tight with tension, asked me, his pupils shaking minutely. Darling, what did the hospital say? Did something bad happen? Why do you look like that? I turned to him, putting on the most devastated expression I could manage, dropping my head. Weakly, I said, "It's nothing, Arthur. They just want to bring my next appointment forward, they say. I have even less time left than they originally thought." At my words, a bizarre mixture of relief and sorrow flashed across his face, while his mouth offered words of pity. Deep inside his eyes, an entirely different emotion sparkled. Watching him clearly, my heart turned to ice. "You are relieved to hear that I might die even sooner. How can a human being change? This much? Can 35 years really ruin a person to this extent?" Truthfully, I already knew. I knew even before the supervisor's call. I had already secretly taken the retest that both Mr. Harrison and the doctor had urged me to take. On the days I claimed to be going to the hospital, I wasn't just visiting the solicitor. I had quietly gone for my retest, and I had already heard the spot-ins. Preliminary news a few days ago, the doctor's call saying there was a high chance. The samples were swapped, and we needed to wait for the final confirmation. So the supervisor's call wasn't a bolt from the blue. It simply confirmed what I already suspected. The first day I found out, I stood blankly in the hospital corridor for a long time. I am not going to die. At first, the reality of it wouldn't sink in. But then a thought struck my mind like lightning. If those two don't know I am alive, if they still firmly believe I am going to die very soon, then I can use their greed against them entirely. So, I decided not to tell a single soul that I was healthy. I begged the doctor and the supervisor. I asked them to keep this an absolute secret until I contacted them myself. Because it was the hospital's catastrophic error, they carefully agreed to my request, and I continued my performance on the stage of the dying wife, never stopping. No, I began to act even more perfectly. I now ate barely a quarter of my soup, and my walk became even more unsteady. Every time I stood before the mirror, I smiled coldly at my haggard face. I never knew that the simple fact of being alive could be such a formidable weapon. That night, while my husband was asleep, I quietly slipped out of the house. I went to a bench in a nearby park and met Thomas, whom I had called in advance. Thomas looked terribly worried, having been summoned out in the dead of night. "Auntie, what's going on at this hour? You're not well. You shouldn't be out in the cold like this." I gently took Thomas's hand. I decided it was time to reveal the entire truth to this kind-hearted boy. I didn't want to leave him in the dark any longer. In a calm voice, I recounted everything that had happened. From the horrific whisper my husband gave me, the existence of that woman, the plot to sell the building that started last November, and finally, the fact that I wasn't going to die. After hearing my story, Thomas was speechless for a long time. Then, massive tears began to fall from his large eyes. "Auntie, is that true? You're not going to pass away? Is it really, really true? I haven't been able to sleep. A wink every night thinking you were going to leave us." Thomas finally burst into sobs, clinging tightly to my hand. I gently embraced him. This boy was the only one who had truly mourned my impending death. Unlike that husband, he was genuine. I patted Thomas's back and spoke in a firm voice. "Yes, Thomas, Auntie isn't going to die. I am perfectly healthy, so now we are going to flip the trap those people dug right back onto them. Right at the moment they are absolutely certain they have won, we will make them lose everything. Will you help your aunt?" Wiping his tears, Thomas nodded vigorously. "Of course, Auntie. I will do whatever it takes. I'm sure those people get exactly what they deserve for what they did to you. I will stay by your side to the very end." With Thomas's words, I finally felt like I was standing on two solid feet. Now, I had Mr. Harrison and Thomas, my true allies, by my side. Sitting on that park bench in the dark, I began drawing the final picture. Where and how I would destroy those two. Suddenly, an upcoming event scheduled for a month's time came to mind. It was the grand dedication gala for my building, marking its official completion and full occupancy, which also coincided with my upcoming birthday. It was a massive event where all the building's tenants, management staff, and The loyal customers who had supported me over the years would gather in one place. Naturally, my husband was scheduled to attend. He would be looking around the building he believed he was about to own, smiling smugly. I smiled coldly in the dark. That is the place. The day they believed would be their most glorious moment. I would turn into their most humiliating graveyard. Until that day, I would flawlessly play the terminal patient. And the moment that performance ended, I fully intended to show everyone exactly who Eleanor Davies, the woman who had endured her whole life, truly was. The day after I told Thomas the truth, my real operation with Mr. Harrison began. I headed to Mr. Harrison's office under the guise of a hospital visit. It was time to pull together everything we had prepared and finalize the trap. Entering the office, Mr. Harrison laid a thick stack of documents before me. He spoke with a reassuring voice. "Mrs. Davies, it's almost done. Let me summarize everything we've put in place. Please listen carefully." I quietly looked over the documents. As Mr. Harrison pointed to each page, explaining our work, I felt my chest fill with a solid sense of security. First and foremost, the legal rights to the building were already moved to a safe haven. Mr. Harrison didn't just leave the building in my name. He legally locked it up tight in an RS/in irrevocable trust. While I was alive, no one, not even my husband, could lay a finger on it. And just in case anything ever did happen to me, the safety mechanism ensured the building would pass directly to my nephew, Thomas, completely bypassing Arthur. The building my husband was so desperate to steal was now surrounded by an impenetrable legal fortress built by my own hands. So, Mrs. Davies, those transfer documents your husband has been rushing you to sign, even if he manages to get your signature on them, they are now nothing more than worthless scraps of paper. The true legal authority of the building is securely locked, away where those documents cannot reach. Hearing that, a hollow laugh escaped my lips involuntarily. Even at this very moment, my husband was desperate to get my signature on that envelope. He firmly believed that a single piece of paper would put a 20 pounds million building into his hands. But that document was already an empty shell. He was frantically reaching for an empty box. "Mr. Harrison, so even if he gets my signature, he truly can't take a single penny?" Mr. Harrison nodded confidently. "That is correct, Mrs. Davies. Not a single penny. In fact, the moment he tries to use that signed document to do anything, it will only serve as glaring legal proof that he was trying to steal your assets. Combined with the laptop evidence and photos you've gathered, they will have absolutely no way out." I finally felt my mind settle into a cold, yet profoundly secure peace. The sweat and tears I shed from 4 a.m. in front of boiling pie ovens, my cracked and bleeding hands, they had now become a solid fortress that no one could ever breach. I gently brushed the documents and muttered quietly to myself, "The owner of this building is not the dead woman you thought I was, but me, Eleanor Davies, fully alive." Mr. Harrison gave me one final piece of advice. "Mrs. Davies, all that's left is timing. You must lay all your cards on the table at the exact moment they drop their guard and are absolutely convinced they have won. That will maximize the shock and leave them no room to escape. Do you have a specific venue in mind?" I nodded calmly at his question. "I do, Mr. Harrison. Next month, there is a grand dedication gala for my building. It doubles as my birthday celebration, so all the building staff and our clients will be there. It's a huge event. Of course, he will be there too. I intend to end everything right there." Mr. Harrison's eyes gleamed. He nodded in firm agreement. "Perfect, Mrs. Davies. By that day, I will ensure every legal preparation is flawlessly locked in place. All you have to do is keep playing the dying wife until that moment." On the way home, I silently watched the London streets out the window. In 1 month, this long, dark tunnel would come to an end. The woman who had only endured her whole life was finally going to tie the knot herself. I quietly clenched and unclenched my fists. There was no trembling, only a rock-solid resolve rooted deep in my chest. When I returned home that evening, my husband came out to greet me with his usual affectionate face. But now, confronting his fake affection felt entirely different. I was no longer afraid, nor was I heartbroken. In fact, I felt I could play the perfectly doting wife better than ever. It was the relaxed confidence of a person holding all the person in ever. Winning cards. Supported by my husband, I offered him the most pitiful, exhausted smile. And then, I deliberately chose the words he was most desperate to hear. Arthur, I've been thinking it over. At our building's dedication gala, next month, I think I want to publicly hand over the management of the building's affairs to you in front of everyone. I want to say my goodbyes and thank everyone who has helped me. So, please, make sure you stand right by my side that day, okay? At my words, his eyes instantly flashed with uncontrollable greed. Publicly, handing over the affairs, he clearly took that to mean I was going to legally announce the transfer of everything to him in front of a crowd. He hurriedly tried to put on a sad face, but the corners of his mouth kept twitching upwards. Of course, darling, of course. I'll be glued to your side that day. Whatever you want to do, I'll help you with everything. Watching his pathetic acting, I laughed coldly inside. Yes, darling, make sure you are right by my side. I have no idea that the day you've been counting down to will actually be the most humiliating day of your entire life. On that brightly lit stage, with everyone watching, I was meticulously digging the grave where you and that woman would be buried. That night, lying next to my sleeping husband, I stared at the ceiling. He had a faint smile on his lips, as if he were having a wonderful dream. Probably dreaming of the 20 pounds million building he believed he was about to own. I stared at his face and made a quiet vow. Dream to your heart's content, darling. The moment you wake from that dream will be the beginning of your most terrifying nightmare. In 1 month, everything ends. In the center of the building I built, facing the freezing dawn, wins. Eleanor, whom everyone thought was dying, will step onto the stage, perfectly healthy, and I will display every piece of evidence I've gathered, one by one, for all to see. Just imagining that final stage made my chest burn cold, yet fiercely hot. The moment Eleanor Davies, who had held her tongue her entire life, reclaimed the throne of her own life, was fast approaching. Finally, the day dawned. The ground floor lobby of my London building was bustling with people from early actually 2's morning. As it was a celebration of the building's dedication and my birthday, all the management staff, commercial tenants, and countless loyal customers from Daughter. My pie shop days were gathered in one place. A small podium was set up in the last place, center of the lobby, surrounded by round tables. To think that I, a woman who spent her life selling pies and mash, would be the center of attention in such a magnificent setting. 30 years ago, I wouldn't have even dared to imagine it. That day, I deliberately wore pale makeup and slumped my gaunt frame into a wheelchair, playing the dying wife to the very end. Beside me, my husband stuck closely, pushing my wheelchair with the most benevolent, caring face imaginable. People clicked their tongues in sympathy at the sight. They envied me, calling him a saint for so devotedly caring for his dying wife. My husband seemed to revel in their gazes, puffing out his chest and bowing modestly to the crowd. In a corner of the hall stood that woman, Victoria. She had attended under the guise of being a property consultant, dressed elegantly, but her eyes were constantly tracking my husband. Whenever their eyes met, they exchanged meaningful, secretive smiles. Smiles, full of absolute certainty that this would all be over soon, and the building would be theirs. Sitting in the wheelchair, I watched them clearly, my heart turning to ice. Go on, smile all you want. You couldn't dream of what is about to happen to those smiles. Soon, the event began, and Thomas, acting as the MC, stepped up to the podium. Suppressing his trembling voice, Thomas addressed the jubilating crowd. Thank you all so much for coming, despite your busy schedules. Now, we will hear from the star of today's event, Mrs. Eleanor Davies. We will bring her up to the podium. Amidst the applause, I slowly stood up from the wheelchair. My husband hurriedly reached out to support my arm, but I gently brushed his hand away. Then, without anyone's help, I walked firmly and steadily up to the blanked podium on my own 2 feet. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The woman who was supposedly on her deathbed was suddenly walking perfectly fine. For the perturblator.gon's first time, a look of sheer panic flashed across my husband's face. I stood before the microphone at the podium. I slowly looked around the lobby, packed with people. And then, not with the frail voice of a dying patient, but with the commanding, powerful voice I used to run the market, I began to speak. Today, I am going to tell you all the most important story of my life. It might be a bit long, but please listen to the end. The crowd looked up at me with baffled expressions. I gave Thomas a nod. Instantly, a photograph appeared on the large projector screen behind the podium. It was the photo I took of my projector screen. Husband's mobile phone screen, that single text message. Darling, is that woman really going in 2 months? I can't wait much longer. The lobby instantly erupted into murmurs. People didn't yet know who the woman was, but I continued, calmly. This is a text message exchanged between my husband, Arthur, and a certain woman. Here, that woman refers to me, his dying wife. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. My husband's face turned deathly, pale. He scrambled to rush the podium, but Mr. Harrison, who was already standing by, stepped in front and physically blocked him. I nodded to Thomas. Again, a second photo appeared on the screen. It was the photo of Arthur holding Lake Fording Lake. Victoria's hand laughing affectionately by the cafe window last December. This photo was taken in December of last year, more than 5 months before I was given my terminal diagnosis. The man holding her hand and smiling so joyfully is my husband, and the woman sitting across from him is Miss Victoria Sterling, who is sitting right over there. Every single eye in the lobby snapped towards Victoria. Victoria's face drained, of blood turning as white as a sheet. She jumped up from her seat and tried to flee, but security staff were already blocking every exit. She was trapped. I didn't stop, projecting the third image. This time, it was the horrific memo I had found on his laptop. Transfer Eleanor's deeds, then sell. Distribute with Victoria. Time it according to Eleanor's health decline. This is a plan my husband drafted starting last November. A plan to monitor my health, sell my building at the perfect moment, and split the cash with that woman. Meaning, long before I even fell ill, this man was counting down the days until my body broke down. The lobby was in absolute uproar. The murmurs grew into shouts, and gasps of horror erupted from every corner. My husband, his legs giving out, staggered and yelled in a trembling voice, "Darling, what is this nonsense? It's a misunderstanding. Why are you doing this in front of everyone? Stop this right now and come down." I looked down quietly at my husband. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, I prepared the final blow. A misunderstanding? Then let me show you one last thing. This is the part that will shock you the most. I gave Thomas the final signal. The last document appeared on the screen. It was the result sheet from the retest I had taken a few weeks ago. On it, written clearly, were the words, "No abnormalities. Patient is healthy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not dying. My terminal diagnosis was a clear misdiagnosis due to swapped samples at the hospital. I am perfectly healthy. And I have known this fact for an entire month." For a split second, the entire lobby fell dead silent, as if cold water had been thrown over the crowd. And in the next second, an explosive uproar shook the room. The woman, everyone I thought was dying was actually perfectly healthy, and she had known everything. For a month? I glared down straight at my utterly pale husband, articulating every word clearly. "Arthur, the death you have been so desperately waiting for is not coming. I have been perfectly alive, watching every single filthy thing you did from start to finish. From the moment you whispered, 'Goodbye, farewell' in my ear. I saw it all." The moment he heard those words, my husband's eyes bulged as if they were, I'm going to pop out of his skull. The shock that his wife, whom he thought was dead, Meat was fully alive and had known about his entire plot from the beginning, completely overwhelmed his system. He opened his mouth like a fish out of water, trying to say something, but no sound came out. His face went entirely white, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed in a heap on the floor. He fainted dead away, clutching the back of his neck. People screamed and crowded around. Victoria tried to use the chaos to escape, but the police had already arrived at the venue. Mr. Harrison had arranged it all in advance. Standing on the podium, I looked down calmly at the pandemonium. The woman who, 30 years ago, crouched in front of a boiling pot in a market, was now standing tall in the dead center of this grand stage. I picked up the microphone and spoke my final words quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stated the one truth I had held back my entire life. The true owner of this building is me, Eleanor Davies, fully alive and well. You have all worked very hard, all of you, and myself included. The day they believed would be their shining moment had ultimately become their most humiliating grave. Standing on the podium, I looked up quietly at the bright sunlight pouring through the windows. To me, a woman who had worked her whole IBN life in the dark before dawn, the sunlight that day felt exceptionally warm and bright. The gala ended in absolute chaos. My unconscious husband was loaded into an ambulance and taken to the hospital. Fortunately, his life was not in danger. He had simply lost consciousness from sheer, overwhelming shock. I heard that when he woke up in the hospital, he stared blankly at the ceiling for a long time. It must have been difficult for him to accept that a plan he thought he had executed was actually entirely within the palm of my hand. From the very start, Victoria was handed over to the police that day. Every single plan and piece of evidence they had fabricated was laid bare. There was nowhere left for her to run. The greed of trying to swallow someone else's lifetime of work while hiding behind the fancy title of a property consultant had ended up crushing her own feet. Hearing the news, I didn't feel a thrilling sense of vengeance. Rather, my heart just felt deeply at peace. I realized that wasting my energy on hating them was no longer worth it. I cleanly severed my ties with my husband. With Mr. Harrison's help, I dissolved every legal tie I had with that man. He didn't get his hands on the building, nor did he walk away with a single penny. Though I felt a brief pang of emptiness thinking about those 35 years, I decided not to dwell on the past. The days I had left to live truthfully were far more precious to me than the 35 years built on lies. As someone who believed her whole life that enduring was the only virtue, it was the moment I finally realized that cutting ties requires true courage as well. One evening, after everything was settled, I went up to the top floor of my building for the first time in a while. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the London sunset was glowing a deep red. Quietly watching that view, the image of myself 30 years ago suddenly came to mind. That young woman crouching in front of a giant stewing pot in the corner of a market. The days of waking up at 4 a.m. to light the stoves, washing pots in freezing water until my hands cracked and bled. I slowly looked down at my two hands. The scars from those days were still visible on every knuckle. These hands, which had been looked down upon my whole life, were actually the magnificent hands that had built this entire building. I gently stroked the back of my cracked hands with my other hand. I told them they had worked so hard and that now they could finally rest. The sunset that day settled warmly over my hands as if comforting me for all those long years. Then someone approached my side. It was Thomas. He stood beside me, watching the sunset together. After a long while, he spoke carefully. "Auntie, is it really all over now? You're really not in pain anymore, right?" I turned to Thomas and gave him a bright, radiant smile. It was no longer acting. It was a genuine smile bubbling up from the very bottom of my heart. "Yes, Thomas, it's all over. Your aunt isn't in pain anymore. I am very healthy. And from now on, I am going to live my life for myself." At my words, Thomas's eyes grew red again. Finally, with tears in his eyes, he grasped my hand tightly. "You made the right choice, Auntie. You've suffered too. Much all these years. From now on, do everything you want to do, go everywhere you want to go, and just live. I'll be right beside you to help with everything." I gently pulled Thomas into a hug. This boy, whom I had taken in and raised as my own after he lost his parents early, had now become my true family, the one person in the world who cherished me the most, the husband who shared my bed but no blood waited eagerly for my death. But this boy stayed by my side until the very end. I finally realized that true family isn't made of blood, but of the heart. From that day on, I truly started my life anew. I began visiting all the places I had never seen because I was working myself to the bone. I bought myself some beautiful clothes and took the holidays I had never been on. Sometimes Thomas and I would sit in a spot overlooking the River Thames, drinking warm tea. Sitting there in the sunshine, I felt that my lifetime of hardship had not been in vain. All those early mornings, all those tears, they were ultimately the terply price I paid for this peaceful time now. The building remains firmly in my name. And one day, when the time really comes for me to leave this world, that building will go to Thomas, the boy who protected me to the end. I believe that is the right thing to do. For the building that holds my entire life to go to the person who genuinely cared for me. Sometimes when I stand in front of the mirror, I gaze quietly at my own face. The face that was once gaunt and haggard, waiting for death, is now flushed with color and glowing brightly. Whenever I see that, I speak quietly to the woman in the mirror. You endured well, and you cut ties well. I, who lived my whole life having lost my own name, Eleanor, had finally reclaimed it. As we go through life, everyone eventually faces a day when they are deeply wounded by someone they trusted. In those moments, we are often taught that endurance is a virtue. But I know now, enduring is not the only virtue. Sometimes, having the courage to cut away toxic ties is a far greater bravery, and that courage will never betray you. I hope this story offers a little bit of courage to anyone currently going through a difficult time. If there is anyone out there right now being treated poorly and losing themselves, please remember this. Your cracked and calloused hands are not lowly. They are the most magnificent, precious hands that have built your entire life. If you have listened to this story to the end, please leave a comment to let me know. I wish happiness to everyone who subscribes and likes this story.